Good morning. Welcome to First United Methodist Church of Del Mar on this very beautiful Sunday morning. I'm very glad to have you with us in worship. We're getting some rain later on, so I'm sorry you're here now in some ways. But I hope you enjoyed the beautiful weather yesterday. Looks like we are moving definitely into fall with the weather forecast later in the week. So the seasons are definitely changing. We were up north yesterday at Plattsburgh for our youngest, parents' weekend, family weekend at SUNY Plattsburgh, but it was also Jay's 19th birthday, so we were there for that. And you can see definitely some color as you move through the areas close to the high peaks around exit 30 or so. Fall is coming, definitely. Call your attention to the announcements that are in the bulletin. You'll see there's an insert there, so that's the kind of thing, a couple inserts, but one with announcements and notes. That's the kind of thing you can go home and put them on your refrigerator, and then you'll have those things available. There's a flyer about the Sunday school kickoff events and intergenerational event, really, on October 2nd. And we partly do an insert for this. If you wanted to put it up so you remember, that's great, but this is actually a great way for you to invite somebody. And so, if you have a neighbor, grandkid, somebody you know that you think might be interested in coming and getting to know us a little bit, it's a great low-pressure opportunity to just slide in and be here and get to know some people without a lot of commitment. So we used to call those, in some ways, I hated this name, but senior pastor I worked with once used to call those fishing pool events, where you try to get a lot of people to come to something so that you could, make connections with them and then invite them back to church. So wasn't ever crazy about that term, but that's the general idea anyway. And those are announcements for this morning. So now let us center our hearts and minds to worship.
walk. He was determined he was going to stay in the bushes and not come out. Okay, welcome. Welcome to the First United Methodist Church in Del Mar. Very happy to see you. We've heard the music. Please rise as you are able for the call to worship. Come, let us worship the one who calls us here.
We gather to worship with joy and hope.
Come, let us worship the one who desires our hearts.
We bring our whole selves in worship to our God.
Come, let us set aside all that distracts us from worship.
We come as we are, and ask the Spirit to guide us in and direct our vision.
Come, let us worship the one who calls us here.
We are here to worship all that we are.
Please join me in hymn number 126 in the big hymnal. O God, we want to have our faith hanging in truth. We want to be a friend of the world and still be your friend. Yet Jesus taught us no one can serve two masters. Give us strength and courage to get our priorities straight. Help us to seek your kingdom first. Help us to live faithfully and joyfully in your world, and be friends with the people who call us to serve. Help us also to remember that our best relationship is the one we have with you. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Please hear these words of grace. The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. In Jesus Christ, we are forgiven. We are given a new way to live. Let us accept God's grace and live new lives of faith, obedience, and joy. Please join me in the Lord's Prayer as in the bulletin. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Okay, the scripture, excuse me. The scripture lesson today is from Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 18 through 9th chapter, verses 1. And you can find this passage in your Pew Bible, Old Testament, page 708. However, I'm going to be using the New International Version, which is slightly different, a little easier to understand. One moment. I found this passage very interesting. Jeremiah is in the middle of a long lament, and even when God interrupts in the middle, he just rolls right over and continues. Sounds a little like a teenager. You who are my you who are my comforter in sorrow, my heart is faint within me. Listen to the cry of my people from a land far away. Is the Lord not in Zion? Is her king no longer there? And God says, why have they aroused my anger in their images with their worthless idols? Jeremiah continues, the harvest has passed, the summer has ended, and we are not saved. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. I mourn, and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no healing for the wound of my people? Oh, that my head were a spring of water, my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. Okay. It's time for children.
Yes, will the children join me for some time up front together? Come, O children of the Lord, sons and daughters of God. Come, O children of the Lord, and hear the word of God. Anyone who lives in God is certainly living in God. Anyone who lives in God no longer walks in the dark. Come, O children of the Lord, sons and daughters of God. Come, O children of the Lord, and hear the word of God. Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing? You're so quiet. Are you always this quiet? No, I didn't think so. You're like quiet at home all the time. No. Just with me. How are you? Good, good. So, I was wondering, any of you have any money? You have some change in the books? Do you have any money? No? You say I don't have any money? We're hearing gospel stories from things from Jesus where he tells parables of things like for 4 weeks we've heard 2, we got this one, and the next one. And every week there's some kind of mention of money. So I don't know if you all have noticed that, but like last week Jesus was talking about someone who was being lost, and he talked about a sheep, which in some ways in Jesus' time would be something of great value to somebody, right? Be part of their livelihood, a sheep in their flock. But he also talked about a woman searching for a lost coin. Right? And then the week before that, there was reference to money. Today, he's going to tell another story about money. And he's actually going to talk about a person. It's kind of a difficult story, so we're going to go into that a little bit more later. But one of the things is, he says, you can't serve both God and money. You can't serve both God and money. So that's one of those things that sometimes it's really hard in the life of the church, because in the world we live in, we got to have money for stuff, right? That's just kind of a reality. So what are some of the things that you need money for? Legos. And Legos are very important. I won't, we probably have thousands of dollars worth of Legos stored in plastic bins in our basement. Gifts from grandparents over many years, 3 kids, you know how it goes. So Legos are definitely very important, something you need money for, right? Taxes, yeah, right? And that's actually, but taxes are important, right? Because we have to have roads to drive on, and we have a fire department to call when, you know, if we need help. And we have police officers that are patrolling around and hopefully keeping us safe and trying to do that and working hard to do that. And so, and we have all kinds of things like that around. We have schools, right? Somebody has to pay for the schools and pay for all the supplies and the buildings and the teachers, right? So, yeah, so that's one. Taxes are one, right? What are some basic things that we need money for? What's a basic thing you need money for? What's something you do every day? Usually 3 times, and then maybe once or 2 other times, or 2 other times.
First, get up in the morning.
Do you eat at all? Or do you just like absorb the energy from the sun? You eat? Yeah. So food, right? We need money for food. Twice a week? Yeah. I'm surprised. With 3 kids, I'm surprised you only have to go twice a week, actually. So yeah, because I had 3 kids, and I know how many times I had to go to the store. So, yeah, that's right. We need money for food, and we need money for clothes. We need money for all those kinds of things, right? So it's a big part of our lives. And moms and dads and people have jobs so that they can earn money, so that they can provide all those things for us. So money is just a reality as part of our life. But Jesus knew sometimes that people get too focused on money. And sometimes it becomes such a worry for people because right now things are getting, got more expensive. Actually, things have leveled off hopefully a little bit, but things got more expensive for a while. So it costs more money to get some food, things like that. So people get worried about it. And sometimes people do things that really aren't the best things to get money, right? So sometimes people, they might do a job that's not really good for them or good for other people. Things like that. And sometimes because they have to have that to survive. Okay? So one of the things Jesus wants us to do, what? Very good. Excellent. So I love history lessons. That's so cool. So yes, after World War I, one of the things that happened, right, is Germany started printing too much money, right? And then the money became worthless. So that's one of the things that can happen. That's a great economic lesson. Yeah, right. So, wow, I love history lessons. I was a history major in college or something. So sometimes it's one of those things that people get a little too focused on. Sometimes we think so much about money, and we do that in the church sometimes too, because sometimes we worry about money in the church, that we really forget to just put our trust in God. And while we need to manage our money well, like if you want a really cool Lego set, right, you have to save up your money, right? So maybe if somebody gives you money for a birthday, and if you get a little older, you might have more of this, right? Somebody might give you some money for a birthday or something like that, or maybe you can do a little job and help somebody with something and earn a little money, right? And so if you get an allowance or anything like that, then you can save up, and over time you'll earn enough that you can actually buy something really cool. That's a way that we use our money well. That's a way we're responsible with it, okay? So that's really cool. How you guys doing over here? Still good? Okay. So one of the things that that Jesus talks about is the fact that we need to remember not to have money control us, right? And we need to make sure that we're not so worried about money and thinking so much about how can we get more money that we stop putting our trust in God. All right? Cool. You doing well? Yeah? Cool. All right, let's have a prayer before we get back to your seats. Wonderful and gracious God, we give you thanks for all of the good things around us, for food and shelter and clothes, for people who take care of us and teach us and protect us. And we pray that you can help us to use all of the resources that we have, including our money, in ways that build people up and help each other out. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thanks so much for coming up. now in our prayer for illumination found in your bulletin. God, help us to change ourselves and to change our world, to know the need for it, to deal with pain of it, to feel the joy of it, to undertake the journey without understanding the destination, the arts of gentle revolution. Amen. Our gospel lesson this morning comes to us from the 16th chapter of Luke's gospel, beginning with the first verse. It can be found on page 79 of the New Testament in your Pew Bible, if you would like to follow along. Will you rise as you are able as we hear the gospel? Jesus also said to the disciples, a certain rich man heard that his household manager was wasting his estate. He called the manager in and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give me a report of your administration, because you can no longer serve as my manager." The household manager said to himself, "What will I do now that my master is firing me as his manager? I'm not strong enough to dig and too proud to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from my management position, people will welcome me into their houses." One by one, the manager sent for each person who owed his master money. He said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 900 gallons of olive oil. The manager said to him, "Take your contract, sit down quickly, and write 450 gallons. Then the manager said to another, "How much do you owe?" He said, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He said, "Take your contract and write 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted cleverly. People who belong to this world are more clever in dealing with their peers than are people who belong to the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to make friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful with little is also faithful with much, and the one who is dishonest with little is also dishonest with much. If you haven't been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? If you haven't been faithful with someone else's property, who will give you their own? No household servant can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to the one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." So ends this reading of the gospel. This is God's word for God's people. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. I'm a big fan of Westerns. Anybody else like Westerns? Usually it's guys. I love Westerns, and I remember talking to my counselor about that at one point. I said I always found that curious in some ways, because usually Westerns are filled with a significant amount of violence and gunfighting and things like that, and I'm actually a pacifist. I don't like that stuff. But I love Westerns. And she said, "Well, the thing is, Steve, it satisfies your passion for justice. Because usually in a Western, right, eventually the good guys win. That's generally the way they work, right? Somebody comes in to town. Shane was just on TV last night, right? So somebody comes into town, and somebody's being persecuted somehow, right? Somebody, usually the settlers or somebody, and usually there's some big rancher or mine owner or somebody like that. You know, they're persecuting people and holding them back, trying to get their land through illegal means or whatever else. And some hero comes into town, rides in, and eventually saves the day. One of my favorite Westerns is Pale Rider. And I have a lot of political differences with Clint Eastwood, but I do like him in some of those roles, right, as an actor. And one of the cool things in Pale Rider is that the hero, the gunfighter who comes in, is actually a preacher. So there's a lot of theological references, there's a lot of things that go along with that. And when he comes into town and he's standing up to the villain in the story, and the villain is the guy who basically owns the town, and he owns a mining company, and he's trying to push out all these small panning miners and get them out of the way so that he can mine more of the territory. And he calls Clint Eastwood's character, he's just sort of known as the preacher. He calls him in to his office, and he's trying to, convince him that he shouldn't really help the miners, panning miners who were there. He should, come, if you come and settle here, we don't have a preacher in our town. So I'd build you a really nice church, and I'd make sure we had some really healthy offerings coming in, and you'd be well cared for, and, it would be a really great place for you to be. And the preacher just looks at him and says, the Bible says God cannot serve both, or people cannot serve, man cannot serve both God and mammon, mammon being money. And the villain's face drops because he knows he's not going to get anywhere. Man cannot serve both God and money. I've also had some interesting conversations with people over the years about our economic system of capitalism and the fact that I think it's really hard for people to be a capitalist and a Christian. John Wesley agreed with that, by the way. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. That it's really hard to be both a capitalist and a Christian. It's really hard to be a business owner and have things in your life be right and just and be doing the things that you need to do to be a good disciple of Jesus, and also to exist in our economic system. To run a business, to make profit, to keep your investors and your shareholders happy. And of course, that's even more difficult in our world with regulations and taxes and all of the things that make owning a business difficult for business owners. And of course, we have a system where we need people to grow food, right? And then to process food, and then to sell food. So we need some kind of system to do that. And everybody has to be compensated for their work, which is a good thing, so that then they can continue to do that work and invest in the things that they're doing. But it's also a delicate balancing act to stand with one foot in each place if you are going to be a person of faith, in this case, in our case, a disciple of Jesus, and be someone who's living and working in a capitalist system. Because your bottom line is profit. The P-R-O-F-I-T profit, not like Jeremiah prophet we heard from earlier. I just fell out of there. Okay. We had projection. I would have put up a picture of a tweet that theologian and church leader named Shane Claiborne made a few years ago. That's after the State of the Union address one year. It said, God does not care about the Dow. God cares about the poor. God does not care about the Dow. God cares about the poor. And so that's that problem, that balancing act of bottom line versus discipleship, of profit versus profit. So then Jesus tells this really weird story, right? Where there's this manager, or this the landlord, the master, with this dishonest manager. And he's going to fire him, says I'm going to let you go. The dishonest manager says, well, I'm too old and weak to do manual labor. What am I going to do to support myself? Nobody else is going to take me in. And so he calls in all of the tenants and says, tell you what, take your bill and reduce it so that you will owe less. And in some ways, now you owe me. Instead of my master, you owe me. And in Jesus' weird parable, because honestly, this is bizarre, he says, and the master commended the dishonest manager. What? The master commends the dishonest manager. This is one of those that a lot of preachers just skip the gospel lesson this day and say, we're going to talk about Jeremiah. Because Jeremiah is great, although he's weird too. This is the guy who ate the scroll, so he did have the word of God in him. Going back to Jesus and his weird story. He commends the dishonest manager, and I've had to sit with this story for a long time, and I've mulled it around over the years. And it occurs to me that Jesus is really talking about the master in the sense of God. And the dishonest manager realizes that he can't serve the master, right? And wealth. He's been trying to serve wealth. He's been trying to look out for things. In order to do that, he's basically cheating the master. In order to make sure that he has provided for himself, he's cheated the master. That's one aspect of this story. There's a lot of layers. But in order to provide for himself, he has cheated the master. He has cheated the one that was the source of all of this wealth, all of these products, ultimately, the one who was the rightful owner of them. He was entrusted with stewardship of the master's resources. And in not managing that well, ended up cheating his master so that he could provide for himself. How much like us, right? Ultimately, we do all kinds of things day in and day out where we are not good stewards of God's resources. We are not good stewards of God's world. And that's why we're now scrambling around trying to figure out how people in rural areas are going to be able to drive as far as they need to on electric cars someday because of the limited range. And how are we going to have batteries and find all the minerals that we need for those? And that's going to create all kinds of international tensions. And some people have them and some people don't. And we're going to be back into a situation where rich countries are taking advantage of poor countries. And people in certain areas are not going to have what they need to survive because others are going to be hoarding all kinds of resources. And here we go again. Because we need to stop pumping so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and methane and other greenhouse gases so that we won't all end up underwater. I know not everybody's going to end up underwater, so please don't take that. But so that we won't have all of the problems that we know will come with climate change. And we've had to make all kinds of adjustments from time to time at other times. I grew up in the Adirondacks where lakes were dying. Some still haven't fully recovered because of acid rain, because of emissions produced out in the Midwest that would carry across and drop their pollutants in the lakes and ponds of the Adirondacks. I remember canoeing places back in the 80s where some of the ponds were crystal clear, because everything in them was dead. Literally. You could see the bottom because nothing was growing there. Nothing was swimming there. A lot of those have recovered. But again and again, we are poor stewards of the resources God entrusts to us. And then we have to scramble, figuring out how we're going to provide for ourselves and somehow survive. Just like the dishonest manager. And sometimes we want to be commended for all the hard work we're doing to undo the problems that we've made for ourselves. And Jesus says, you can't serve both God and money. You can't serve the master and wealth. Ultimately, what you need to do is put your trust first in God. Easy, right? Sure, no problem. The hardest thing when you're a preacher is to stand up and preach this message. This part's the easy part in some ways. The problem is then you get to the part of how. What does that mean? What does that look like day in and day out in the world? And sometimes we don't always have all of the answers. But it occurred to me years ago. And I got some input from, honestly, people of some other faith traditions who sometimes are better at this than we, who say things like, well, what you have to do is start with one thing. There's another Westernish movie called City Slickers. Anybody ever seen that one? And Curly, about a bunch of city people who go to be on a cattle drive. And the old cowboy who's there keeps saying, life is about this, is what he says, about this. Ultimately, it's about one thing. You have to start with one thing and do that. And then another thing and do that. You have to start with the things that you have control over, the things that you can manage, the things that you can do. And in order to do that, one of the things that you can do is try to wake up every morning and say, first, here I am, Lord, I'm ready. Here I am, send me. What are we going to do today? Now, I'll tell you, when I wake up in the morning because the dog is poking her wet nose at me, because Heather went in the kitchen and the dog couldn't get to her, and she decided to come up and wake me up, it's really hard to have my first thought be, here I am, God. I'm ready for the day. Or when I've had a long week and I wake up on Friday morning and I just want to roll over and go back to sleep. It's really hard sometimes to say, God, here I am, send me. I had a person in one of my congregations who said that she wrote it on a piece of paper and taped it to her nightstand. Here I am, Lord, send me. So the first thing she looked at when she reached over to turn off her alarm clock or woke up in the morning and looked to see what time it was would be that reminder, here I am, send me. I'm ready for the day. We make a lot of messes in our world. We are not good stewards of the resources God entrusts to us. And the best thing that we can do to undo that, to fix that, to remake that, is to be intentional, to pick something that we can do and do that. And then another and another. And make every day the first thing we do about saying, here I am, God. What's next? Amen. Our hymn of response this morning is number 2177 in the faith we sing. That's the black one. Wounded world that cries for healing. Will you rise as you are able as we sing together?
Jesus, our healing Spirit, free us to another way. Through our nations, with frustration, through the corridors of stress, make them all apply the wisdom, obey Him and obey less. Facts and time of for a purpose, shelter, shield the poor and weak. That's the symptoms of the sickness, when the voice of justice speak. On the thoughts of loving Spirit, loses, restores, and heals. in the tending, in the mending, may we see the bright and gray. In the common quest for wholeness, hear each other by our name.
Please be seated. Sometimes we need to talk about the nuts and bolts of how things work, and one of the things I want to make sure people know is, first of all, how many of our pledges and how much of our giving actually comes in the mail each week. So thank you to those who are not here, perhaps joining us by live stream, away for the summer, who mail in your financial contributions. That's a wonderful testament to your intentionality and your sense of purpose in your stewardship, and we deeply appreciate that. Also, a reminder that we have ways for electronic giving, and so be sure to check those out through our website at delmarmethodist.org, especially if you join us by live stream, watch the service later on, or if you are just someone who maybe don't write checks anymore, like a lot of our younger folks. My kids have never written a check, so they don't have checks. It's just not part of their reality. And so if that's an easier way for you to make contributions, there are ways to do that at one time and on a regular basis. So be sure to check that out through our website. And now the ushers will help us in gathering tithes and offerings.
Please join me in singing for the offertory, number 263 in the hymnal, When Jesus the Healer Passed Through Galilee, number 263.
When Jesus the healer passed through Galilee, hear us today. Are there quick to hear and like to see? Hear us, Lord Jesus. A paralyzed man was led down through a room. Hear us today. His hands walk by him, his walking uproom. Hear us, Lord Jesus. But when love is daughter was dearest to me, hear us today. Our Lord heard and he raised up the sea. Hear us, Lord Jesus. When my bitterness I went unto the Lord, hear us today. His faith made him more, and his sight was restored. Hear us, Lord Jesus. Praise the Lord, all that saints along. Praise God of angels here below. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Praise God the source of all my gifts. Praise Jesus Christ whose power uplifts. Praise the Spirit, Holy Spirit.
join me in the prayer of dedication? Stand. Please remain standing for our. Okay. Holy One, you have given yourself to us in Creator, in Christ, in the Spirit. We now give back to you
This money that seems so little, this worship that seems so small, these words that never go.
Receive what we offer and transform it by the power of your Spirit into
Enough money, sufficient praise, worthy words for proclaiming and acting, peace, justice, and love. Please be seated. And will you join with me in the responses found there in the prayers of the community? When so much of our world is groaning with injustice and destruction, we are invited to turn to God and one another. We are not meant to carry the struggles of the world alone, and so, in a spirit of collective embrace, may we share together in prayer for all that troubles our hearts. For all the bodies in suffering, deprived of resources, withheld from care, or made into targets of violence. God, hear our prayers. And for all whose spirits are in despair, those who are facing loss or grief, those who are isolated, or those struggling to accept their own worth. God, hear our prayers. For all the ways power is wielded over communities and individuals, for those living under oppressive forces, for the temptation towards complicity with injustice, and for the ways the church sometimes uses you, O God, as a weapon, rather than a tool for healing and liberation. God, hear our prayers. Just as we are not meant to shoulder the world's pain alone, we are equally invited to delight with one another in the joy that sustains us, for the beauty that grows around us. God, we give you thanks for the gifts of shared meals and community and relationships that transform and sustain us. God, we give you thanks for art and music and stories and truths that foster love and connection. God, we give you thanks for every source of courage in the face of all that makes us afraid. God, we give you thanks for your presence within and around us, in our highs and lows, our hope and our despair. God, we give you thanks. Hear our prayers and deepen our willingness to show up with and for one another, sharing in each other's burdens and working for one another's protection and care. Amen. Our final hymn this morning is number 127, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Will you rise as you are able as we sing together?
Just
world where things are constantly going on, just this past week, in the last few days actually, there have been accounts of governors of states deciding that playing political games with the lives of human beings, in particular children, seemed somehow to them like a good idea. In the midst of that, we hear Jesus say, you can't serve both God and money. You can't be more concerned with financial resources than the people of God. You can't serve both God and money. Humanity bears the image of God, according to Jesus. Humanity bears the image of God. And so if you're more concerned with financial resources and a theology of scarcity than you are with bearers of the image of God, if you're unable to recognize God in the humanity that surrounds you, listen to Jesus' words. You cannot serve both God and money. Go forth this day to serve God. Go forth this day to serve God's people. Go forth this day to care for all of the things that are bearers of God's image. Your neighbors, the people you meet and encounter in the streets. Go forth this day to serve God and one another, and go forth in peace. Amen.